episode 2 of making the Jedi costume. So I took back the design we had last time and the colors that I've chosen and played with and showed them to the person I'm building this for, and we talked about what they'd like to do, what they'd like to see, and what they'd like to have, and we came up with the colors you see here. I did end up actually going through and doing a little bit of shading down in here just to give it a little bit more life, and frankly I wanted to play with it a bit. And then now we're done. We're ready to start planning out the panels and how to decide how much fabric we actually need before we go buying. So here we have the original sketches of the costume that we took into the computer to do the colors of, and now we're going to come back to the paper because we want to start planning the separate pieces. So here's one, which would be the undershirt including these arms. Two will be this vest with the tabards attached. I've decided I'm going to sew these strictly to it because I could sew them to the sash, which means they would effectively hold the sash up, but if I sew them to the vest, I can sew them to the top up here as well, which means they won't ever fall off. If the trade-off is the sash itself can move up and down, but I'll make this so it's Velcro so the person will be able to tighten it up and then it'll stay up just like a regular belt. In addition, these belts, well, this belt here primarily will help hold it up, this one down. And then, of course, this piece here, the cloak, will be one piece as well. In terms of fabric, we have one color here, which is also the arms. We have a color for the vest, a color for the collar and sash and the armbands, and a color for the tabards and border, and then the last color for the cloak. So right, choosing the first piece to do, the hardest pieces to make will be the vest and the shirt. The easiest is actually the cloak because this is just one straight long piece. The hoods are fairly straightforward, depending on how I solve the inside of the neck. Sometimes there could be lots of pleats, but that's what this step is about deciding how I want to build it so I know how much fabric of each type to buy, and then once I have the fabric, I can cut the pieces and start sewing. Maybe the cloak. Let's look at how I would choose to build the cloak. So if we think about the fabric comes in long strips. It's usually about 55 inches this way, and you normally buy it in 1 meter sections, 1 or 1.5 meter sections. The cloak, I like to build it so that the full width here, this space here, is the whole width here. There's the edges here are always a bit away, so you usually lose a couple of inches there, but I want my pattern to go the full width like this to cut in for the shoulders, because you'll need a bit for the rounding here, and then to come back out so that at the top of the shoulders here, up here, there's actually no seam. The seam just goes up to the shoulder and then it's one piece. And then the second half of it, I'm going to use a cutout here, and it'll come down, and this is the front here. So, because I know the height of the person I'll be doing it for, I only need about 1.5 meters height. But then we also have the hood. So the hood, I've decided to do a triangular pattern. So it'll be shaped more or less like this with a cutout inside for the neck, and it'll sew directly onto the collar here. So this point will connect here, the hood will come up here, it'll hang about a third to a halfway down the back, depending on how long I end up making this, which will be a factor of this here is going to be this width here of the fabric. This here, if we unroll this, it would look like this, and then this would be here. This here, what I'll probably do is just put a dart in the fabric here, So this ends up being a straight piece, and then there's darts that meet in the back underneath here when assembling it, so that the hood will have a natural break around here. So when it's sewn, it'll have the darts there and naturally break down. So then it'll fold at this point and have a drape like this. So this piece here, if this is 55 inches and I want it to hang down yay far, I want to do another 55. So we could look at that and go, okay, that's about just over a 1 meter if I was saying the same thing. 4 meters for the cloak. And I like to take a smaller notepad here so that I can just write all this down. We can talk about the tabards, and because we started the cloak, the edging on that, which I want to do in the same fabric. So we have the hood up here. We know this is around 55 inches, so the hood would be up here. We have the front of the cloak and then the base down here. But if you remember from the sketch, the cloak breaks up like this, and it has this big tattered part where there's no edging. So we only need that much, which is half the width, so 55, 25-ish inches, another 25-ish inches, so 50 inches there. This here is 1.5 meters approximately. Why am I using metric and imperial? Because that's kind of how the fabric comes. So we know this is 1.5 meters. We can always pull out a calculator and figure out what that is in inches if we want. So it is actually about 1.5 meters for 55 inches. So we have those, and then of course the tabards themselves are roughly this height on the person and then down to their thighs, plus the back where they meet behind. And I didn't really show it in these drawings, but I'm planning to put 3 straps on the back just so that they look cool. So the back, and then the front, and then here. Now from your neck to your shoulder is often about this actual size here, so around 5 or 6 inches. But you're going to want overhang on both sides so you can fold it under and do a sewn border. At least I am. You can do it 2 ways. You can do it double thick, so you can do like a big tube, which gives it a bit more weight, or you can do just a hem edge on it, which is what I'll do on this one, because it's a lighter costume, and because of the size of the person, I don't want too much bulk on them, or else it's going to look like they're wearing shoulder pads, which not ideal. So we're going to want at least 6 inches plus 1 plus 1, so at least 8 inches here, 8 inches here. This is a meter, this is at least half a meter, so 1-2 yards for this, and about a yard for that. 3 meters, 2 or 3 meters. You can probably get away with 2 because you can put diagonal seams in here, which when I'm doing the construction I'll show you how that goes, and actually there's going to be a seam down here anyways. That's a perfect place to add a seam right there, just so that you can gain a little bit. This edge here on the cloak, I will do one of 2 things. In cross section, the material for the cloak can come up, fold under, get a hem, and I can sew this to the border material and do the same. I can do a hem, and I'm planning to do this about 3 inches. Do another hem over here to save about an inch there, or I could do it continuous and just sew it here so that we have a seam, which means it would be 3, 6, 7 or 8 inches wide, all of this, so really long piece. This is my preference to do it this way. It adds a little weight to the edge. It'll help it hang nice and straight down at the bottom down here, and it'll be tactily a little nicer. Although if I do that, I'll probably sew right here and here just to give a little bit more visual detail to it. Next, the vest. The vest is tricky, and here's why. The vest is essentially a tube with a hole for your head. I'm going to have slits up the side, kind of like how polo shirts do. So it'll have a front and back flap, which will give a lot more mobility. This will hit right about the waist. You have open holes for both arms. Actually, let's draw those a little taller, because we're almost going for like a muscle shirt type thing. So you have open holes here, but this space here is just a little wider around than the person's actual waist. So this fabric needs to have stretch, or else they will get stuck in it and never be able to get out, and we'll have to use a stitch ripper and cut them out. Alternately, I could put a zipper in here if I found a really nice looking fabric for this that was not stretchy. Then we could put a zipper in the side, which isn't as hard as people think. Sewing in a zipper is pretty straightforward, but ideally we'll find a stretch fabric. Because this layer is sort of intermediate, it has the tabards sewn on top, and actually sewn on here, attached at the back, and hanging down the front as well, actually just a little past that hem there. Because these are attached, they're going to add structure and weight to this, and so this underlying fabric doesn't need to be very heavy. So I actually probably will find a jersey fabric for that, because it will have nice drape to it, be a nice lighter weight, not be too heavy or hot for the person wearing this. Okay, got that cleaned back up a little bit. So we have this. The neck, as you'll recall, isn't shaped like this. It comes down into a V, and there is also a collar sewn onto this that comes across to here. So something like that. So underneath the jersey is there. We'll come here, and then it'll have this on top. So this is roughly the construction of this piece. Let's clean up a little bit of this so that we can see what's happening a little bit better. Now for buying this fabric, we know that this piece and the back piece are roughly the same size. The person's waist isn't 110 inches, so it doesn't need to be an enormous amount of fabric that we need. And we know from here to here is going to be roughly a meter. So we will get 1-2 yards at least for this. And that will be ample for this because it's a fairly simple construction. The biggest thing will just be getting this width right and this length right. And then this, if I get most of it sewn, I can get the person in it while there's still just a slit for a neck hole, draw where I want the V to hit them, sketch it out afterwards, make it symmetrical. I'll be, probably the next video will be starting construction either on this or the undershirt. This piece here, the collar is a different fabric. For that I'm going to want something a little bit more textured, a little bit heavier, just again so that it matches with the tabards and has a bit more weight. And similar to the edging on the cloak, we're going to want this to be a little bit wider so that we can do the double over, sew it on, and give a lot of depth. I'm planning to make the front piece all one piece and just have this as a sham wrap. So instead of doing a full gi across and then having closures here and on the inside here, this will just be a pullover. So this will also, because it has a deep V, doesn't need to be a stretch, but I'm going to want to do a stretch just so it's a little easier to put on. So we have this, and in the same fabric is the sash, which is the same width, and it'll come around, but I like to do Velcro back in here, so we need a few inches of overlap for the Velcro inside. We have the little belt loops, which even just in offcuts we'll have plenty of for that, and then the wrist wraps. The wrist wraps need to be a tube essentially. We can think of it as a tube that then just gets cut like this for the wrapping, and they need to be diameter the same as your forearm. So you can think of this as like 5 or 6 inches, but both ways. So it needs to be 8 to 12 inches wide and then about 12 inches long. So we actually almost need a half meter just for these. So we'll need about a meter here, half a meter here and maybe half a meter here. So overall for the sash and details in dark gray, we're going to want somewhere in the neighborhood of 3 meters. So here you can see the final design for the sweater part, which I'm calling the sweater because I want to make this out of a light knit fabric similar to a light sweatering fabric, because it's going to need stretch. It's going to be fairly fitted across here and across the shoulders. So for ease of entry and exit, and so that I don't need to try and add zippers in the side or some sort of Velcro enclosure here, which would add a lot of weight and complexity to it, I want to choose a fabric that'll just be easier to build it, even though the sacrifice is it's usually a little bit more expensive. Here you can see I did a quick diagram of how I want to stitch these pieces here. So a double layer on the top for a little extra structure, and then layering down the seams so that it lays nice and flat. This adds a lot of pieces to it, so I did a quick diagram of how many pieces I would need just for the collars. Of course, these did extend off to accommodate for this, which I will be tracing out probably in the next episode. Alright, so ultimately we have these 2 large panels, and then on the back, the panel that would be the back of this. We have the 4, 8, 12 smaller panels here, and then the 2 sleeves. So 1, 2, 3 sleeves, usually about a ½ yard each, is more than plenty. So a total of 4 meters of fabric for this one. So now I have my shopping list. For the cloak, I want black fabric, 4 meters, doesn't need to stretch. For the tabards and the edge detail in a tan, I need about 2 or 3 meters. I like to err on the side of too much, but we'll see how much it costs. For the vest, I want an ash color in 2 meters. For the sash and the details, I want a dark gray fabric in 3 meters. And for the sweater, I want black fabric, this one in stretch, in 4 meters. And next time I will go over how I finalize the patterns and start laying out on the fabric for cutting.